Welcome to the Relationship Series podcast. My name is Ankush Jain, and each episode I'll be speaking to a different state of mind expert on the subject of relationships. Enjoy. This week I'm joined by Amy Chen Mills Naeem. Amy is a global speaker, wellness coach, trainer, and author of State of Mind in the Classroom, Thought, Consciousness, and the Essential Curriculum for Healthy Learning, as well as The Spark Inside, a special book for youth. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here, Ankush.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show, and I know this is going to be a fun interview because we've already had a bit of a giggle before we started recording. So I'm very much looking forward to this.
Well, don't get your hopes up.
I've been warned.
Yeah, and I just want to say before we get started how grateful I am to you and others like you who are, out of the goodness of their hearts and wanting to provide a public service, putting out recordings like these for free on the internet. I just feel it's such a gift. So thank you so much.
No, well, thank you for coming onto the show. It's a pleasure to have you. For people that don't know much about you and much about your background, would you mind giving a bit of a potted history of your career and what you've been doing in the space around state of mind?
Well, let me see if I can make a long story very short. I've been working in state of mind for almost 20 years, so I'll try to be brief. My interest grew out of my own experience of going through a depression, which may have been diagnosed as a clinical depression if I'd had it diagnosed, which I did not. But in the midst of that depression, my coming out of it related to thought, the idea of thought and how whatever we think is what we experience, as well as some deep spiritual insights that I had, in looking at thought and in a way surrendering my own personal mind. So that got me quite interested in people who suffer from depression. And then I got involved in a training program in Santa Clara County, California, where they were teaching the 3 principles of mind, consciousness, and thought, which some people may know about and some may not. And from there, because my father was very involved in this particular movement, after about 6 years teaching in Santa Clara County in the jails and with county employees and with different departments and in juvenile hall, with the corrections, both adults and young people, teenagers, I co-founded the Center for Sustainable Change with my father, who's actually well known in the field of bringing ideas of innate resiliency and innate well-being to community-based work, as well as to the field of psychology. My father passed in 2010, and we founded the center in 2004 together, and for 10 years I was the director. My father was the co-founder and president. And so my work over the last 10 years has been working with foundations like the Kellogg Foundation, the San Francisco Foundation, to connect with families in communities across the country, in both higher income areas and very low income areas. What's interesting to me is that there's this term called at-risk, at-risk youth, and that's traditionally been applied to young people who are in low-income neighborhoods, maybe part of a minority group in the United States or elsewhere, and who have traditionally, suffered from racism or racial disparities. Now, what I'm seeing in looking at families in Palo Alto, California, in Silicon Valley, and everywhere, is that young people are in distress and at risk in every socioeconomic group that we have. So that's been one of my big takeaways from the work I've done across the country and now also globally, teaching people about the role of state of mind in families, with parenting, in relationships for couples, and also with educators. So now I have my own, there's a new director at the center. I have my own coaching and personal and public retreat business. So that's what I'm doing now. And I'm most interested in and have been working with families and people who need help in their families. As we talked about earlier, and I think I heard Joe Bailey say on one of your other interviews, if you have a family, you probably have some issues to work on. So we all know. I think once I said I'm a human being, and I can tell you I have a family. Enough said. Because we all bring so much of our own ideas into family life, and that's what causes the friction.
That's really interesting. So I'd love to hear some stories, perhaps, of what work you've done with families and what issues you might see and how you might go and approach those to make those issues, I guess, better or disappear.
Well, I'll tell you, I have a hard time distinguishing my work anymore from my day-to-day life as a parent and as a mother who's involved in her children's school. And I say that because I'm just constantly meeting families, and so I'm constantly seeing these principles behind state of mind or the idea of thought in action. And so I see when either I'm working with a client or I'm just noticing in my community that parents tend to have a lot of ideas about what their children, well, this is, different sorts of parents, but they can have a lot of ideas about what their children should be like. And that's true for romantic relationships as well, isn't it? So when the idea of what their child should be like is not matching up with the reality of the child, and parents tend to be more focused on what they think their child should be like rather than really looking and seeing what their child actually is like. That's when the child can start to rebel or become unhappy. The parent obviously is becoming unhappy. I don't know, there's so many examples. We worked with a parent this was actually a low-income neighborhood in North Carolina, a woman who was used to actually hitting her kids. And in some parts of this country and in some families and maybe all cultures, people are still doing that. And she went to a couple of workshops on parenting from this perspective of looking at our own thoughts and how that creates our anger and our own feelings rather than the child. And she came home to her children, and when her children were getting upset, she just, for the first time, she listened rather than strike out or have an opinion. And so her children started to say, aren't those workshops coming up again, Mom? Isn't this Monday? And they started to push her out the door to go to the workshops because she had changed so much at home. So that's just one example. I mean, there's so many, I've worked with so many people now, it's hard to even pick one or two out. I've also worked with children whose parents, well, in this case, it was the mother was relaxed, the father was perhaps more driven, but this teenager came to my office, and this is when we were in Palo Alto at the center, with her mother, and she was so stressed, and she was like 16 years old, and she was so stressed about grades and getting into the right college, and that she was having like little panic attacks, and her health was suffering. And it was interesting to me, it sort of hit me for the first time because the mother was concerned about her daughter. Her mother was a professional with a job and so on, and yet her mother was more relaxed about life than the 16-year-old. And it just struck me because I thought, isn't it, when we're 16, isn't there supposed to be this sort of, we're having fun here, we're experimenting a little bit, we're out with our friends, we're still playing in a sense, and that was gone from this girl's life. And I see that more and more, I hear about that more and more, and I think it has to do with the way the culture itself is starting to speed up, and people are feeling like the need to keep up with so many different aspects of life. So anyway, those are just a couple of examples that I could share with you.
So what could be done about that? So I'm sure a lot of people listening to this can relate to life feels a lot more sped up now than it perhaps did 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But what can they really do about that so that they're not bringing so much conflict into their family lives?
Well, there's this tremendous momentum that I think we all get hooked into. And the internet certainly, while on the one hand can be a tremendous boon and benefit to us all, and we see that in what you're doing, Ankush, in providing free, slowing down information to people globally and almost instantly. We saw the power of the internet in the Arab Spring and the uprisings toward democracy. However, also we can constantly be now in communication with others. We can be online. We can be feeling like if we're not ourselves posting YouTube videos, we're terribly behind, So I think it takes this internal recognition that it's okay to stop. It's absolutely okay to stop. And I think, one of the questions you had for me before we started this interview that I read on the paper that you give out to your interviewees is, what is one of the most essential points that you'd like to make? And my point would be that when we choose to become parents, there may be many different reasons why. But one of those reasons is for the sheer joy, the anticipated joy of being around children and seeing them grow. And in our rush to get them to the next stage of their lives, to make sure they're prepared for college, to make sure they're prepared for junior high or in the right junior high or even in the right preschool, we often miss that just simple enjoyment of who they are now. And life is now. Life is living life. This is what we forget. We can only find well-being in this moment. There is no other place to find well-being because in time, no other place actually exists. And if we can start to recognize that both in our parenting and in our lives in general, you hear stories now of people. So there's this incredible sort of rush to more and more technical or technological progress and so on. But you also hear stories of people who are starting to respond differently. And, I know there was one book about a man who gave up even spending money, even touching money for a year, and found his life slowed down tremendously. There was another family I heard of that sold everything and, went to live in the woods or something. I don't remember the details, but without necessarily having to be dramatic, although perhaps, wisdom is telling us to do something quite dramatic. I can never know for someone else. We can have a dramatic revolution inside our minds in which we recognize the truth that actually life is short and, there's only so much we can actually get done in one human lifetime. And then once it's over, what of it, right? So for me, that's sort of maybe the main message that I'd like to share. It's one that I continue to remember myself, to come back to, that all we have is today. And if we can find today and this moment and slow down and become present, then a lot of the details actually get handled And in parenting, especially, our children feel recognized and they feel loved and they feel, and this is what's so essential, what every parent says they want in workshops for their children, they feel of worth. And I think that's to go into life growing up feeling of worth is probably the number one protective factor against all of the possible dangers, societal dangers that our children may run into. This feeling of essential worth and well-being is what's going to keep them the safest and the most well.
That's really beautiful. And what occurred to me was that parents are often innocently trying to do the best for their children. They're trying to do the best that they can, and what I heard in what you were saying is that actually the best thing that they can do for their children is give them this feeling of well-being.
Yes.
Is to slow down.
Yes.
Because actually if you do push them into all of the things that they think they want, they still won't get that feeling where they can get that feeling right now.
Exactly. And we can sort of look at this technicality of course we can't give our children a feeling of well-being, but when we ourselves live in a feeling of well-being, it's contagious, when we are not pushing and rushing and distracted and yelling because of our own inner stress, then there's just so much more space for the innate well-being of children to arise. And I was just thinking of a client that I just recently worked with who actually is quite wealthy, a tremendously wealthy individual, who was facing really almost the collapse of his family. And as we were talking, he had an insight, which was he was spending a lot of his time trying to protect his wealth and grow his wealth for his family, as you say, in innocence. Thinking if I get all this money together, then we'll be safe, we'll be protected, we'll have everything we need, we'll have freedom and vacations in the future, right? But what was happening is that he wasn't being present for his family. And everything he feared might happen started to happen because that innate well-being was not being tended to, paid attention to.
Yeah, and I wonder how many other relationships that applies to, where we just want the other person to be present with us.
Oh, God. That's all we want, isn't it? I mean, situationally, we may be on a working team where we need to be focused on a project for sure. But even then, our presence, our attention to the moment brings in so much more intelligence to do that kind of work, So, but then just in life, isn't that, you're so right, Ankush, isn't that what we crave, is just that sense of intimacy and fun and joy that comes from being present with each other.
Yeah, I remember talking to a friend of mine, and he was saying that how his wife was complaining that he didn't spend enough time with her anymore. And he was going, but I'm doing, I'm working so hard to, provide for us, and, and this was before I had learnt about state of mind and the principles behind state of mind. And yet then, and maybe obviously I wasn't involved, obviously I was kind of a step away, and even then I could, a friend of mine, another friend of mine and I just said, she probably just wants you to be there. She probably just wants you to spend time with her and be present. because she didn't marry a cash machine.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and actually, some women do think they're marrying a cash machine, right? And perhaps men these days as well. But, what we find with all of these external goodies, the money and the even the family, in terms of, okay, we now have the perfect, nuclear family with the little boy and the little girl, is that isn't enough. It's this, the outside forms, including the money, are not enough, and they don't have the power to give you well-being. So to me, it's a misplaced sense of where well-being comes from.
I'd love your thoughts on whether there's a trade-off. Do we need to give up some of the goodies in return for well-being? Is it a trade-off, or can we have both?
Well, I think it's all, situational. It's all for each person in the moment. This person I was talking to, this client I was mentioning, actually has enough money to retire today, and yet there's still a sense of more money can be made. And some people enjoy going to work and making money. It's not that money is the enemy, or that one shouldn't make money, but it's really seeing where we've misplaced value. Money has become this sort of like, how people get into crystals, and crystals like have different supposedly magical powers to make you feel soothed or to make you feel energized. I mean, we talk about vitamins this way. Well, we do that with money. We think money has magical powers to make us feel soothed and to make us feel energized, and now certainly we need to pay the bills and, make sure we have our food, shelter, and clothing taken care of, and I understand that. But after a certain point, and that's up to everyone to look within and discover, at what point have we become closed down to our family or even to being generous? At what point has money created this sense, or the thinking about money is what it is. It's not money. Money has no power. It's our thinking about money. At what point has it created a sense of constriction? So we think money is freedom, but I've found the opposite to be true in terms of the way people think about money.
Yeah, that's a lovely explanation.
It was an insight that I had to have in my life. I'm a human being, just like you, and I realized at one point I've never been a money chaser. That has never been my central focus. But I had an insight, about maybe 5 years ago, that I was giving a kind of power to money, and it really was the idea that money had some control over my value as a person, how much money I had, how much money I was making, even the spiritual ideas of, abundance. If you're doing good work and you're in your heart, you're going to have all this money coming in. That's not true. There's no evidence needed that you're doing good work and you're coming from your heart. That's enough. I don't know if that makes sense. We've been talking quite a bit about money, but maybe it's quite relevant.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that it's always interesting to see where these interviews go, and they take on a life of their own sometimes.
Yes.
But it's all related, and I guess you can replace the word money with so many different things, and how people think that the ideal partner is what's going to make them happy, or the ideal children is what's going to make them happy, or the ideal boss, or or the ideal car.
Yes, or career, or role, or fame. I think Sydney Banks, who some people may know of, who first came up with these principles behind state of mind, has said, and I remember thinking when I was younger, I don't get that. I don't get that. He said, I advise you not to have too many desires. You may not live to see them all come true. And I thought, that's a downer. Because I was full of goals and ambition, and and there's nothing wrong with goals and ambition. It's just when you think that your well-being is attached to the achievement of the goal. That's the mistake.
Yeah, we can get so caught up chasing the goal that we don't enjoy the journey of getting there.
We don't enjoy journey or no journey, this moment of either we're maybe just sitting having a cup of tea. There's no movement. There's no qualification on this well-being that we are.
So to take a slightly different tack, if you like, what would you say to people who would say we're just trying to think ourselves happy and ignoring the realities of life?
Well, I have a teacher that I just love. She does not come from the three principles that you talk about sometimes. Her name is Gangaji. She's a spiritual teacher from the lineage of Ramana in India. And she has this phrase that I love, and I've heard it from other teachers. It's not new. It's called tell the truth. I think everyone can look into their own hearts and tell the truth about where am I putting too much emphasis that it's, I think that this is going to make me happy, to be making this much money, and where am I taking care of business? Taking care of business is something that is about just surviving and providing. That's one thing. And I'm not opposed to luxury. I'm not opposed to people having money. I'm just saying that everyone needs to look situationally and say, where am I creating anxiety and distress because of my desire for some kind of, amount of money or life situation? And that's about telling the truth. So when people are able to stop and start telling the truth to themselves, about themselves, then it becomes very clear, what needs to be done and what doesn't. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. It's there's a certain depth behind the words that you're saying in it, and I'm resonating with that. I sometimes take questions from people who write in, and I had a question from Victoria, who had asked me to ask on the relationship series, and her question was, if our natural state is love, happiness, peace, and we can experience this in any moment, then we are capable of loving everyone. What then causes two specific people to be attracted to each other?
Well, there's the form and the formless. And what she's speaking to in the first part of her question is the formless. Love itself is not particular. It's all-encompassing, and you might discover this all-encompassing love by delving into a particular love. When people fall in love, suddenly they're falling in love with one person, and yet suddenly the whole world is beautiful, and they're in love with life, and they're in love with everyone, and their friends, and the trees, and that's it's a beautiful state, and that's the true state. That's the true connected state. However, we live in a world of form, and we have personalities, we have proclivities, we have things we like to do, and I don't argue for people to just drop everything and we don't. Even if I told people just drop all your preferences, they wouldn't, because they're sort of in there, And for the most part, a lot of our preferences aren't causing problems. Someone likes rock music and someone likes classical. So I think in terms of like a partnership, we tend to gravitate toward people that both have similarities to us that we can feel really comfortable with, and at the same time, I've found that there's always a challenge. In a long-term romantic relationship, there's always something the other person has a proclivity toward, or something in their personality that we don't get, and that becomes sort of the learning curve in our relationship to appreciate how they see life. So I'm not opposed to the form. I mean, people talk about I would prefer one career over another. So I don't tell people, look, if you're in a career and you're unhappy, just change your thoughts. Sometimes that works, and then it's a beautiful thing. But sometimes someone needs to find another career, and that's the flow of wisdom, for each person. This wisdom takes form in this world of form in our lives. And it's really a beautiful thing, actually.
Yeah. We're nearly out of time now.
And oh my goodness.
Just got one final question, which is, are there any stories, hopefully embarrassing ones, that you'd like to share from your own life of how these principles behind State of Mind have been in place, specifically around relationships and your own relationships?
Oh, no embarrassing stories whatsoever. I have such a long list, Ankush.
Please pick the most embarrassing one, and we'll be okay with that.
I think since we were going to be talking about parenting and children, that I had so many ideas about what parenting should be, or what the children should be like, and it took having children to bring them to the surface, and I have gone through, I think what I'd like to share with other parents is that I have gone through tremendous internal struggles, that have exploded from time to time into an external struggle with a child or my husband, and what I just love is that that's just part of being human and being spiritual and being in this journey of discovery. And so I've been in situations, I'm thinking particularly with one of my daughters, where I really have felt quite helpless, like she's going to end up on the streets, she's going to end up, using drugs, all these terrible images in my head because of me, it's my fault, something I did, and now look at how she's behaving because of what I did. All this, just a mess. And there's just this tremendous capacity we have to wake up, to forgive ourselves, to not know, to go into the unknown, and to find love again. And that's happened with my children just again and again. Like, we'll just have these beautiful times where I enjoy them so much. And I can feel, it's almost like I'm fertilizing the earth. I can feel the power of that love and what it's doing for all of us. And other times I'm just lost. And that's just an opportunity to see again something more deep or deeper about thought and about this tremendous love, that is.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm sure there are a lot of parents that would like to listen to this and hopefully would like to get in touch with you as well. how might they do that?
So the best ways are through the website. My new website is www.amychen, so that's Amy with an I and then CHEN.com. And also on Facebook, I have a Facebook page called Amy Chen Coaching and Education. And my email is on the website, but it's amy@amychen.com. And yes, I'd love to hear from parents and others, people in relationships. It's just my joy to work with people to help them rediscover the love that is here.
Thanks, Amy. People can find all of these episodes on iTunes. You can also find more about me on my website, which is ankushjain.co.uk, on Facebook, which is facebook.com/AnkushJain Ltd, and on Twitter, which is @AnkushKJain. Thanks, Amy, so much for this, and I'll speak to the listeners next time.
Thanks, Ankush.
This was the Relationship Series podcast. If you like this episode, please share it and leave us your feedback online. Thanks for listening.